I didn't catch my girlfriend cheating the way people imagine it happens. There was no dramatic confrontation, no walking in on them together, no screaming or crying in the rain. It was quieter than that, more humiliating. I was 24, living in the same small American town I'd grown up in, the kind of place where everyone knows your parents and pretends not to know your mistakes. My girlfriend, Sarah, and I had been together for almost 2 years. Long enough that people assumed permanence. Long enough that I assumed it too. That night, she fell asleep on the couch with her phone in her hand. I wasn't snooping. I swear that. Her screen lit up when a message came in, buzzing softly against her palm. I glanced over without thinking. I wish I hadn't. The message wasn't explicit. It didn't need to be. I still feel you when I'm with him. That sentence sat there, glowing in the dark like a confession meant for someone else, because it was. I didn't wake her up. I didn't touch the phone again. I just sat there, frozen, listening to the sound of my own breathing while something collapsed inside my chest. In a town like ours, rumors travel faster than truth. And suddenly, every late night, every canceled plan, every distracted smile lined up perfectly. I hadn't been paranoid. I'd been patient. The next morning, Sarah kissed me like nothing had changed. That hurt more than the message. I went to work on autopilot, smiled when spoken to, nodded when required. By the time I came home, the decision had already been made somewhere deep inside me. I just hadn't accepted it yet. That evening, I told her what I'd seen. She didn't deny it. She cried. She said it was a mistake. She said it didn't mean anything. She said the words people say when they want forgiveness without consequences. I packed a bag and left. The town noticed immediately. They always do. By the time I crashed on my brother's couch, people were already choosing sides without knowing the story. I didn't want revenge. At least, I didn't think I did. What I wanted was silence. Distance. A way to stop feeling like I'd been replaced without warning. That's when I started taking late-night drives. One night, I stopped at a bar just outside town limits, the kind locals go to when they don't want to be recognized. I ordered a drink I didn't really want and sat alone. That's where I met her. She wasn't flashy. No forced smiles. No trying to be noticed. She sat a few seats away, reading the room like she understood people better than she let on. She looked at me once and said, "You look like someone who just lost a future you thought was guaranteed." I laughed, short, sharp, surprised. "Is it that obvious?" She smiled. "Only if you've been there." Her name was Rachel. She was 35, and I had no idea yet that meeting her would change not just how I saw Sarah, but how I understood power, desire, and the kind of revenge that doesn't leave fingerprints. I didn't plan on talking to Rachel that night. I'd gone to that bar for the opposite reason, anonymity. A place where no one asked questions or cared why you looked hollow. But Rachel had a way of noticing without staring, of saying the exact thing that made pretending pointless. We talked slowly, not the kind of conversation where people perform, the kind where pauses don't feel awkward. She didn't ask about my girlfriend. She didn't need to. People who've been broken before recognize the signs. She told me she'd moved back to the area after a divorce. Not dramatic, not bitter, just factual. She had lived in bigger cities, built a life, watched it unravel, then decided she wanted quiet for a while. Small towns are good for disappearing, she said. Until they're not. I liked that she didn't romanticize anything. When the bartender called last round, I realized 2 hours had passed. Rachel stood, grabbed her coat, and smiled like she wasn't expecting anything more from the night. "Take care of yourself," she said. I watched her walk out, annoyed at myself for not asking for her number, and relieved that I hadn't. I wasn't ready for anything new. I was barely ready to exist. But small towns don't let things end cleanly. 3 days later, I saw her at the grocery store. She noticed me first. "You look slightly less wrecked," she said. "Progress," I replied. We laughed. It felt good. Unfamiliar, but good. This time, she asked about Sarah. I told her the truth. Not the dramatic version. Just the facts. Rachel listened without interruption, then said something that stuck with me. She didn't cheat because she wanted someone else, she said. She cheated because she wanted to feel different. That reframed everything. Rachel didn't flirt. Not obviously. She didn't touch my arm or lean in close. But there was an intensity in the way she paid attention, like she wasn't wasting energy on things that didn't matter. We started running into each other intentionally after that. Coffee, walks, long conversations that never crossed lines but hovered close enough to make me aware of them. She knew I was younger. She didn't pretend not to notice. She also didn't treat it like leverage. You don't need someone to fix you, she said once. You need time to decide who you are without her. No one had ever put it that cleanly. Around town, Sarah started noticing my absence. She messaged me. Apologies. Regret. Confusion. I didn't reply. Rachel didn't tell me to ignore her. She's trying to rewrite the ending, she said. You don't have to help. I didn't realize it then, but something was shifting. Not just emotionally, socially. People were starting to see me differently. Not as the guy who got cheated on, but as the guy who didn't fall apart publicly. And Rachel? She watched it all with calm precision. Like someone who knew exactly how stories like this usually ended, and had no intention of letting it follow the usual script. If you'd asked me back then what Rachel and I were, I wouldn't have had an answer. We weren't dating. We weren't hiding anything. We also weren't innocent. There was a tension between us that never announced itself, but never left the room either. Like a wire pulled tight, not snapping, just humming. She never rushed me. That was the most disarming part. Most people, when they sense vulnerability, either exploit it or retreat from it. Rachel didn't either. She treated my uncertainty like something temporary, not fragile. We spent time together in ways that felt almost deliberately unromantic. Morning coffee instead of late-night drinks. Long walks instead of dark corners. Conversations that wandered into uncomfortable territory and stayed there until they made sense. She asked about my childhood, my parents, what I thought my life would look like by now. No one had ever asked me those questions without an agenda. One afternoon, we sat on a bench near the edge of town, watching traffic drift past like it had nowhere important to be. I mentioned the age difference for the first time. Does it bother you? I asked. She didn't answer right away. It would, she said finally, if you were trying to be something you're not. Or if I was. That was it. No reassurance. No flirtation. Just clarity. Sarah, meanwhile, was unraveling. Not dramatically. Quietly. The way people do when they realize they're no longer the center of the story. Mutual friends mentioned she was asking about me. Wondering if I was seeing someone. Wondering if I was happier. Rachel never asked me to update her on any of it. She's watching you, she said once. People always do when they lose control of the narrative. That word, narrative, started to follow me. I noticed how Sarah framed things when she talked to others. How she painted herself as confused but well-meaning. How I became distant, unavailable, hard to read. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. Rachel didn't correct anyone publicly. She didn't need to. The truth has weight when it's not defended too loudly. One night, after a long walk, we stopped outside my place. The air felt charged in that quiet way that only exists when something is about to change. I looked at her. She looked back. Neither of us moved. Not tonight, she said softly, like she was reading my thoughts. You don't need to confuse desire with healing. I nodded, embarrassed and grateful at the same time. That restraint did something to me. It made me trust her. Weeks passed. The town settled into new assumptions. Sarah's messages slowed, then stopped. I didn't chase closure. I didn't need it anymore. Rachel and I crossed the line eventually, but only after it stopped feeling like an escape. When it happened, it wasn't frantic or impulsive. It was deliberate, mutual, grounded. And afterward, lying there in the quiet, Rachel said something that should have scared me. This isn't about her anymore, she said. But she's going to think it is. She was right. Because in a small town, people don't need proof. They need a story. And whether I liked it or not, Rachel and I were becoming one. The moment Sarah realized she'd lost me wasn't loud. There was no confrontation. No dramatic apology at my door. No tearful confession meant to rewind time. It happened quietly, the way most real losses do, when effort stops being optional and starts being necessary. She saw me with Rachel. Not doing anything inappropriate. Not touching. Just standing too close in the parking lot outside the cafe, talking like two people who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. In a small town, that's enough. Later that night, my phone buzzed for the first time in weeks. Sarah, I didn't think you'd move on like this. I stared at the message longer than I should have. Not because I cared what she thought, but because I recognized the tone. It wasn't sadness. It was panic. Rachel was sitting across from me, legs tucked under her, reading. She looked up, saw my expression, and didn't ask. She finally noticed, she said. I nodded. You don't owe her a response, Rachel added. But if you answer, do it for yourself, not to manage her feelings. That distinction mattered. I replied with one sentence. I didn't move on. I moved forward. Sarah didn't respond. The town did. People started asking questions again, but different ones this time. Not whispered sympathy, but curiosity. Rachel wasn't from here. She didn't fit the town's expectations. That made her interesting. Dangerous, even. I noticed how Sarah's friends stopped smiling at her posts. How her version of events lost traction. The more she tried to explain herself, the more exposed she became. Rachel never commented. Never liked. Never reacted. She's fighting an invisible opponent, Rachel said one night. That always ends badly. I asked her if she felt bad. She shook her head. Feeling bad would mean I believed she didn't know what she was doing. That was the difference between Rachel and me. I had loved Sarah. That love made me generous with excuses. Rachel had no such attachment. She saw actions for what they were, choices. The subtle revenge wasn't planned, but it was inevitable. Rachel and I didn't hide. We didn't flaunt either. We existed, openly, calmly, without shame. In a town built on comparison, that was enough to tilt the balance. One afternoon, I ran into Sarah outside the post office. She looked tired. Not broken, just worn down by the effort of holding on to something that no longer existed. So that's it, she asked. You just replaced me with someone older? I didn't answer right away. Rachel had taught me something important. Silence isn't weakness when it's intentional. I didn't replace you, I said finally. I stopped waiting. Sarah stared at me like she didn't recognize the person speaking. And maybe she didn't. Because the guy who would have explained himself, apologized for her discomfort, or softened the truth to protect her feelings, he was gone. That night, Rachel poured us both a drink and said, "This part usually hurts more than the cheating." What part? I asked. Realizing you were never irreplaceable, she said calmly. I didn't feel cruel hearing it. I felt free. And somewhere in town, Sarah was starting to understand that some losses don't come with second chances, only consequences. Rachel was the first person who made me understand how reputation really works in a small town. It's not about what's true, she said. It's about what people stop questioning. Sarah was questioning everything now. Her tone shifted. Her posts got longer. Her explanations more detailed. She started answering questions nobody asked. That's usually the moment people sense blood in the water. Rachel never participated. She didn't correct rumors. She didn't defend me. She didn't need to. The calm way she moved through town, confident, composed, uninterested in approval, did more damage to Sarah's image than any accusation ever could. People noticed the contrast. I noticed it too. With Rachel, I wasn't reactive. I wasn't trying to prove I was okay. I simply was. That stability made others uncomfortable because it didn't match the story they'd already decided to tell. One evening, a mutual friend pulled me aside and said, "She's not handling this well." I knew who he meant. I didn't ask for details. "That's not your responsibility anymore," Rachel said when I told her. She was right, and that truth carried weight. The fundraiser came around again. Same venue, same faces, different energy. Sarah showed up late. Rachel and I were already there, talking with people who hadn't spoken to me much before. Not out of loyalty, out of curiosity. Someone asked how we met. Rachel answered honestly. No embellishment. No drama. She mentioned timing. She mentioned boundaries. She mentioned respect. Sarah was within earshot. I saw her expression change, disbelief first, then something closer to fear. Not because she was being attacked, but because she wasn't being defended anymore. Her version had nothing to push against. Later that night, Sarah approached me alone. "You never told them your side," she said, voice strained. "You let them think whatever they want." I looked at her and realized something unsettling. I didn't need them to think anything. "That's because I don't need a side," I said. I lived it. She stared at me like she was waiting for something else. Anger, guilt, reassurance. She got none. Rachel watched from across the room, calm as ever. On the drive home, I asked her if this was what she'd meant by balance. "Yes," she said. "This is what happens when you stop managing other people's perceptions." That night, I slept without replaying conversations, without wondering what I should have said differently. That was new. Sarah left town a few weeks later. No announcement. No goodbye. Just gone. People filled in the gaps themselves. I didn't celebrate. Neither did Rachel. "This is the part where most people think revenge should feel better," she said quietly. "But real consequences rarely come with fireworks." She was right. What I felt wasn't triumph. It was relief. And for the first time since everything fell apart, my life felt like it belonged to me again. Not as a reaction, not as a response, but as something I was actively choosing. When Sarah left town, the noise went with her. Not immediately. There were still echoes, conversations that paused when I walked into a room, questions that hovered but never landed. But over time, the silence settled into something real. Not emptiness. Space. Rachel and I didn't rush to fill it. That was another difference between us and everything I'd known before. There was no urgency to define what we were becoming. No pressure to label, announce, or secure the future. We let things exist before we tried to own them. "You're learning to sit with yourself," Rachel said one night as we walked past darkened storefronts. "Most people never do." She was right. For the first time, I wasn't measuring my days by who approved of me or who might be watching. I wasn't bracing for judgment. I wasn't rehearsing explanations in my head. I was just present. Our relationship deepened in ways that surprised me. Not louder, not more intense, just more honest. She challenged me when I slipped back into old habits. When I apologized for things that didn't require apology. When I tried to shrink myself to keep the peace. "Don't do that," she said gently. "You don't owe comfort at the expense of truth." That sentence rewired something in me. The age difference came up more often now, not between us, but from the outside. People assumed dynamics that didn't exist. Power imbalances, motives, timelines. Rachel never defended herself. "You don't correct assumptions," she told me. "You outgrow them." I started noticing how differently I moved through the world. At work, I spoke with more certainty. I stopped over-explaining. I stopped asking permission for things I was already qualified to do. It wasn't confidence in the loud sense. It was alignment. One afternoon, we sat on her porch, the same place where so many of our conversations seemed to land. I asked her if she'd ever regretted staying in town. She thought about it. "No," she said, "because I didn't come here to disappear. I came here to reset." That word stuck with me. Reset. That's what this was. Not a rebound. Not revenge. A recalibration of everything I thought I needed to be okay. I realized then that my anger towards Sarah had fully dissolved. Not because she deserved forgiveness, but because she no longer occupied space in my decisions. Indifference had replaced resentment, and that felt like freedom. Rachel noticed before I did. "You stopped flinching," she said. I smiled. I didn't know I was. That's how you know it's real. We talked about the future that night. Not promises. Possibilities. I admitted I might leave town someday, not to escape it, but because I'd outgrown it. Rachel didn't panic. "Good," she said. "If you stayed just for me, it wouldn't last." That kind of honesty should have scared me. Instead, it made me trust her more. Because love that demands stagnation isn't love. It's fear in disguise. And for the first time in my life, fear wasn't driving me anymore. Small towns don't forget. They pause, they whisper, they wait, but they never truly move on. I knew that. I'd grown up watching reputations calcify over single mistakes, watch people get reduced to one version of themselves that followed them for years. So when Rachel suggested we stop being careful, I hesitated. "Careful how?" I asked. "Careful about being seen," she said. "Careful about shrinking." It wasn't a dramatic declaration, just a quiet refusal to keep living half visible. The first time we walked into a crowded place together, not a back corner cafe or a late-night diner, but the busiest bar in town, I felt every nerve in my body wake up. Conversations dipped. Someone laughed too loudly. A phone came out. Rachel didn't flinch. She ordered a drink, asked me about my week, leaned in like nothing had changed. Like we weren't rewriting a story people thought they already understood. And something strange happened. Nothing exploded. No confrontation. No public scene. Just observation. And then, slowly, normalization. People adjusted. Some disapproved silently. Some didn't care. A few even smiled like they'd been waiting for something honest to break the monotony. I realized then how much power I'd been handing over to imagined reactions. After that night, things shifted quickly. Not recklessly, deliberately. We stopped timing our outings. Stopped avoiding familiar streets. If we were together, we were together. No disguises. That transparency did something to our relationship too. It removed the last layer of performance. We weren't playing roles anymore. The wounded guy, the mysterious older woman. We were just two people choosing each other, openly. One evening, I ran into Sarah. It wasn't dramatic. Just unexpected. She was standing in line at the grocery store, hair shorter than I remembered, eyes tired. When she saw me, her expression tightened, not anger, not jealousy, something closer to uncertainty. We exchanged a few words. Polite, surface level. Then she looked past me and saw Rachel waiting by the exit. Something passed over her face. Not regret, realization. The kind that comes when you understand the story continued without you, and it didn't fall apart. I walked away feeling lighter than I'd imagined. There was no satisfaction in the encounter. No closure speech. Just clarity. Rachel asked me later if I was okay. I am, I said. I think I've been okay for a while. I just didn't trust it yet. She smiled. That's growth. Our conversations deepened after that. We talked about past relationships, not with bitterness, but curiosity. Patterns. Blind spots. Choices we'd made when we didn't know ourselves well enough to choose differently. Rachel never framed herself as my teacher, but she was honest in a way that forced reflection. You don't need to be fixed, she told me once. You just needed space to become. That line stayed with me. I noticed how our intimacy wasn't fueled by chaos or urgency. It grew from mutual presence, from shared silences, from mornings that didn't require explanations. The age gap became irrelevant, not because it disappeared, but because it stopped defining us. It wasn't the story anymore. It was just a detail. What defined us was intention. And for the first time, I wasn't reacting to my past. I was choosing my present. Not every turning point announces itself. Some arrive quietly, disguised as normal days, until you look back and realize everything balanced on that moment. Ours came on a Tuesday. Rachel got a call in the middle of the afternoon. I was sitting across from her at the kitchen table, half listening while scrolling through emails. She didn't answer right away, just stared at the screen, jaw tightening. Is everything okay? I asked. She nodded once. Too quickly. It's work, she said. An opportunity. That word can mean anything. She told me later that evening. A consulting position. 6 months. Out of state. Not permanent, but not local either. The kind of chance that doesn't repeat itself. I felt my chest tighten in a way I hadn't felt in months. Not fear of losing her. Fear of asking her to stay. She watched me carefully, like she was waiting to see which version of me would show up. The old one who clung, or the newer one who understood choice. I haven't decided anything, she said. I wanted to talk first. We took a walk. No destination. Just movement. The town felt smaller than ever, like it was holding its breath. I don't want to be the reason you don't go, I said finally. Rachel stopped walking. And I don't want to be with someone who needs me to shrink, she replied. That's why this matters. The honesty hurt. In the cleanest way possible. We talked about logistics. Time. Distance. Expectations. Things people avoid because they're afraid of breaking the spell. I realized something uncomfortable that night. Part of me had started to build my stability around her presence. Not dependency, but proximity. And that was still a risk. She noticed the shift in my expression. You don't lose me by letting me move, she said. You lose me by asking me not to. That sentence forced a decision I hadn't known I was postponing. I told her the truth. I don't know what this looks like, I said. But I know I don't want to trap either of us in a version of life that's too small. She smiled. Not relief. Respect. That night, nothing physical happened between us. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, hands barely touching, talking until the sky outside turned pale. It felt like standing on the edge of something fragile, not because it was weak, but because it mattered. In the following weeks, we prepared for the possibility of space. Not emotionally distancing, practically. Schedules, visits, boundaries. And something unexpected happened. The relationship didn't strain. It strengthened. Because it wasn't built on constant access. It was built on trust. On the last night before she was supposed to decide, Rachel asked me a question. If I go, she said, will you keep becoming yourself, or wait for me to come back? The answer surprised both of us. I won't wait, I said, but I won't disappear either. She nodded. That's the right answer. I didn't know then whether she'd take the job. I only knew that whatever happened next wouldn't be dictated by fear. And that, more than anything, felt like love. Rachel took the job. She told me on a quiet morning, sunlight cutting across the kitchen floor like nothing significant was happening. No suspenseful pause. No apology. Just truth, delivered cleanly. I'm going, she said. For 6 months. I nodded before my mind caught up. I know, I replied. And I meant it. We didn't promise anything dramatic. No vows. No guarantees about what we'd look like on the other side of distance. Just intention, to stay honest, to stay present, to not pretend this would be easy. The first few weeks were harder than I expected. Not because I missed her constantly, but because her absence revealed how much I'd relied on shared routines. Morning coffee, evening walks, the rhythm of being seen without explanation. I had to rebuild that rhythm alone. And strangely, that made me stronger. We talked often, but not obsessively. Some nights were long conversations. Others were short check-ins that carried more weight than hours of small talk. We gave each other room to live full lives, not just maintain a connection. Rachel never asked for reassurance. She asked questions. What did you learn this week? What scared you? What felt honest? No one had ever asked me things like that before. I started noticing how distance stripped away illusion. There was no chemistry to hide behind, no physical closeness to smooth over misalignment. What remained was compatibility, or the lack of it. And to my surprise, we aligned even more clearly. Back in town, the story had settled into something dull enough that people stopped paying attention. New scandals replaced old ones. That's how small towns work. Intensity burns fast, then moves on. Sarah crossed my mind less and less. Not because I was suppressing anything, because there was nothing left to process. One night, Rachel admitted something. I've never done this before, she said over the phone. Long distance. I asked. No, she said. Choosing growth without sacrificing connection. That mattered. It told me this wasn't just my evolution. It was mutual. There were moments of doubt, of course. Times when miscommunication flared, when silence felt heavier than it should. But instead of spiraling, we addressed things directly. No games. No testing loyalty. Just conversation. Halfway through her time away, I got an offer of my own, a role in a nearby city. Not a huge leap, but a clear step forward. The kind of opportunity one might have ignored before out of fear of disruption. I told Rachel about it that night. I think I want to take it, I said. There was a pause. Then, I'm proud of you. Not threatened. Not anxious. Proud. That response confirmed everything. The distance didn't weaken us. It clarified us. It showed me that what we had wasn't built on revenge, or escape, or timing. It was built on two people choosing growth, separately and together. As her return date approached, I felt something unexpected. Calm. Not anticipation laced with anxiety. Just readiness. Because no matter how the story continued, I knew one thing for sure. This version of me wasn't going back. Rachel came back on a Friday. No dramatic reunion. No slow-motion airport moment. Just her car pulling into the driveway as the sun dipped low, the town looking exactly the same as when she'd left, like it hadn't noticed anything important had happened. But I had. We hugged longer than usual. Not because we were trying to prove anything, but because it felt earned. Comfortable. Real. That night, we sat on the porch again. The same chairs. The same quiet street. But the space between us felt different. Not smaller. Not larger. More defined. 6 months ago, she said, this could have broken us. It would have, I replied. Back when I thought closeness meant control. She smiled at that. We didn't talk about the future in terms of forever. We talked about alignment. About how our lives could intersect without collapsing into each other. About choosing, not clinging. And that was enough. The town never fully caught up to who we'd become. It still remembered the mess, the whispers, the easy narrative of betrayal and rebound. But that story no longer belonged to me. Sarah became a footnote. Not a villain. Not a lesson wrapped in anger. Just a moment that redirected my life. I realized then that revenge had never been the point. The real shift wasn't in what Rachel and I did, but in what I stopped needing. Approval. Validation. The last word. What lingered was self-respect. I took the new job. Started building something that felt like mine. Rachel expanded her work, no longer shrinking herself to fit the town's expectations. We didn't save each other. We witnessed each other. And that made all the difference. If you'd asked me a year earlier what healing looked like, I would have described closure. Confrontation. Justice. But healing wasn't loud. It was quiet mornings without dread. Decisions made without fear. Love that didn't demand erasure of self. The age gap stopped being a headline. It became irrelevant, because what mattered wasn't when we were born, but how we showed up. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something better. A grounded one. Sometimes betrayal doesn't destroy you. Sometimes it clears the space for a life you were too afraid to choose before. And that's the part of the story people don't talk about. But it's the part that stays.